Hello everyone, Paraskevia, I'm Mr. Smith and here I am live in Tbilisi, Georgia. And today we're going to be looking at 4 sounds which I call the fancy sounds, which are the letters j, z, kh and gh. Then we're going to learn a little bit more about the type of Georgian script that we're learning, which is Mkhedruli, which is where we really need that kh. And then on the third part of today's class, we're going to do a small little test so I can see where we are in our reading skills as we develop more of an eye for the scripts that we're learning. If you're ready, let's go. Okay, let's begin. And let's start with the 2 that are the easiest to say. Frankly, j and z. Je, from pleasure, treasure, Asia, and Jaja Gabor. I always think it's kind of fancy, and that's why I called it a fancy schmancy letter. I think they're just variants of words that we can't say in English anyway. Je has a hook and then a diagonal that goes into the right-hand corner and then hits the back right to the bottom and then hooks and comes up. This one has a bit of like character when you write it, and I think that once you've got that technique down, just hook, line and diagonal, I think those 2 straight lines are quite welcome, because not really all Georgian characters contain these hard straight lines, and so it's actually something which I found quite easy to produce. Here, zhirapi. Zhirapi is an animal with a long neck. It's a giraffe. And then mažalо. Mazhalo is a pretty dated word. It's a type of crab apple, like a sour apple, small. We now say vashli. That's what you're going to buy in the market. You're not really going to see them for sale. But one thing that is interesting is mzhave. And mzhave with the ja, not this a, but mzhave means sour, acidic. It's got often pickled flavor profile to it. So it is actually something well within the Georgian taste palette. And so you will actually hear that word again. Moving on, dz. Dz is, for me, a little bit like the word fade. It fades. The maid, the maids. It's d, z, hard d, hard z, dz. Here it's one of the easiest to write. I mean, simply it's a line here with a loop circle at the bottom. It is, in fact, the opposite direction of the next letter that we're going to do. So this one you can learn, then the following one is much easier too. Dzua. Dzua is horsehair, horse's tail. Generally, it's not something you need to really think about. I mean, unless you're buying bows for a violin or something like that. It's a bit abstracted. We don't necessarily use it. I don't. I'm not really near horses. But dzidza is a nanny. In the dictionary, it does say wet nurse, but nanny is a perfectly acceptable word for someone that takes care of a kid. I chose dzalian as the word that you should be learning if it's going to be within this register, because dzalian you're going to use a lot and you're going to need to say it. The other version is the more street version of dzalian, which is dzaan, and it's used in the same way. So dzalian kargi, really good, very good. Dzaan kargi, really good, very good. There's not much of a difference between those 2. Okay, and now we're getting to the ones which are technically difficult, but not as hard as the adjectives we did last week. Tkha. Tkha is like loch, if you think of a strong Scottish accent. Mujer, the jota in Spanish, is already an existing sound in the Spanish language, but from an English language perspective, just think of it loch, strong Scottish accent, and you've got it, nailed it. Also, it's a really easy one to write. It is the inverse of the one that we just studied. So whereas the z has the loop and it goes up here, the kh has the loop and it goes up here. So they technically face in a different direction. Here we've got tkha. Tkha is a goat. It's an animal. And then we've got tikha. Tikha is a material. Pots are made of tikha. It is clay. Now, I decided to put in as your more relevant and useful otkhi and khuti. Otkhi, khuti. So much more useful, so much more frequent. But again, just for practice, I'd like them to be done the way that they've been taught for a century. Just makes sense to me. Tkha, tikha, otkhi, khuti. This one sits further back in the throat. Similar vibration. It growls, but it's r. R. This one doesn't have an equivalent in English, but you can see that basically just bringing down the kh back into the throat, you get the r growling out. Writing it isn't that exceptionally difficult. It looks just like the O with two of these main arches. It comes down into a tail and then back up again. The fact that it looks a little bit like a love heart makes people particularly like it, but it's interesting for such a penetrating sound. It has such a beautiful look. You can do it this way, down and back up into the two arches, or the other way, two arches and then down. I normally do it this way, but I've seen it go the other, and there's no reason why you can't. As long as you get it right and it looks like this, you're good. This shape, pay attention, it's going to come up again. There are three characters with this form. The D, the L, and the R are very similar characters, and so we're starting with this one because of its complexity, but I hope that when we do other letters which are much easier to follow, you'll be able to enjoy them, writing them, because this is a good start. Berura. Berura. Berura is a sparrow, a little bird, and bari is garden. I chose the word ria. Ria. And the reason why I chose that one is because it's literally everywhere. When you go to see a shop, they got the sign to see whether it's open or not, and if it's open, ria. So it's more useful than you think. Now that we're halfway through the Georgian alphabet and we've done the hardest characters so far, I think the rest of it should be relatively easy, and I think now is the right time for you to be aware of the three different styles that have evolved. Because we're focusing on Mkhedruli. That's the style that we're learning to write. We're not learning the older capital letters version of Georgian because they're only really relevant in old texts that you see in museums. You see them in archaeological museums, exhibitions, scripts, text writing, liturgy, things like that. If you take a look at this, A, B, C, D, and E written in this old English way is something that I think all native speakers of the English language can read. But we don't need it. So Asomtavruli, which just means letter from the alphabet. Tavi, which means head. Principal, head, capital letters. This is the capital letter style version of Georgian. You don't need it, but you must be aware of its existence. They are all the same height. They are all the same width. And that's the characteristic of Asomtavruli. Nuskhuri appeared later on. It is a graphic variant of Asomtavruli. It became the dominant form over Asomtavruli from the 10th century onwards. Nuskha just means that it's an inventory or a schedule. Of course, we can see a little bit of the evolution of the use. It starts to become applied in much more areas of life. So I've decided to show you here with the old block version of the graphic capital letters, and then a more written version as things start to become more exposed to writing. People become more literate in general, and literacy is a key factor in the introduction of Mkhedruli. Because Mkhedruli and the printing press and the evolution of printing and the increase of literacy makes this one the dominant form from now on. It's the one that we're learning. Mkhedruli. This A, B, C, D has a more calligraphic look to it. It is not of these large, blocked, equal width, equal height letters. They all have a lot more variance to them, a lot more flexibility, and a lot more fluid. Mkhedruli first appears in the 10th century. Mkhedruli became the universal writing system outside of the church in the 19th century with the establishment and development of printed Georgian. Mkhedruli is typically calligraphic in nature. And that's what we are learning. But we will have to remember that Mkhedruli has its own graphic variant too, and that both can be used in the same way on the same page. And it isn't a struggle for Georgians, and it shouldn't be a struggle for us, because as soon as I finish this slide, you're going to take a look at one example, and I'm just going to give you a head start to reading both the calligraphic version of Mkhedruli and the graphic version of Mkhedruli on a soap bottle that I found while I was here. Just for reference, Mkhedari is a knight, a horseman, a nobleman on a horse. And then Mkhedruli, Asomtavruli is an alternative name for Mkhedruli. Just tells us, of course, how dominant and how pervasive this is in the whole of Georgian logotypes. And now we get to the challenge of today, which I couldn't believe my luck when I was in my bathroom here and I could see this staring at me, and I thought, this is what we're going to have to do today. This is hand soap. Apple-flavoured hand soap. And we learned today that apple is vashli. So we're going to try to find that word inside this. So here's a close-up. And the word is here. V-a-sh-l-i. A-I. Vashli. K-l-a-s-i. E. Yeah? K-l-a-s-i. K-e. Now, classic E is written in the calligraphic Mkhedruli that we have been studying. Of course, some of the letters we haven't studied yet, but it's almost there. Here is more graphic. They're all the same height. They're all the same width. Of course, they're not all the same letters. In fact, what I can see, of course, is K here, K here, K, R, I, A, L, A. Kriala. Kriala. Okay, that's the brand. Kriala. Here are just the words for soap, hand soap. So we've got here chelis with ch that we learned today. Chelis. Chelis. And then balsami. B-a-l-z-a-mi. Balsami vashli. So this is just telling us that this is a balsam, it's a soap, for the hands of the scent or the aroma of apple. Kriala, chelis, balsami, vashli, classiki. That's it. Well done. Thank you very much for your time. In the link in the description below, you're going to see a video which I particularly like that runs through the whole of the Albanian. I really hope you see the characters that you already know, like little friends that have come to support you with the other characters that you're going to need to learn. The rest of the vocabulary list will be available at the bottom of the description. It's also available online if you follow me on Instagram. I have a big weekend ahead of me, and I hope you do too. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next week. Nachwamdis.